Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and a very good morning to Madam May and fellow friends. Today we are from Group 2 going to present the case study of Back into the Fold, Capitaland'S Privatisation of Capitamalls Asia. My name is Nur Shazaliana binti Abdullah. I will start the presentation with the introduction of company. Capitaland is a diversified real estate company based in Singapore. Its headquarters and exchange listing are in Singapore, and it owns and manages a global portfolio worth approximately 137.7 billion as of 31 March 2021. Capitaland's portfolio includes commercial, retail, business park, industrial and logistic properties, as well as integrated development, urban development, accommodation, and also residential properties. The group has presence in over 240 cities in over 30 countries, which are focused on Singapore and China as its key markets. It also expanding in India, Vietnam, Australia, Europe, and also United States. Capitaland is one of the world's leading real estate investment management companies, while Capitaland Mall Asia is one of Capitaland's subsidiaries, which is one of the Asia's leading shopping mall developers, owners, and managers in terms of total property assets and also geographic coverage. The aim of the Capitaland is to be a global leader in providing high-quality real estate products and also services that benefit people and also the communities. Next, we move on to the issues of the case. The first one is the conflict of interest arise from parent and subsidiary company directorships. The problem arises as the result of the board's multiple directorships. The presence of multiple Capitamalls Asia directors who also held the position of director and senior management positions in Capitaland was a major source of concern. The second issue is ambiguous function of different players' role in a privatization. The issue occurs when CMA forms an independent board committee (IBC) to advise minority shareholders. And then, in accordance with the takeover code, the CMA also selected Deutsche Bank AG Singapore branch as its independent financial advisor to advise the IBC by giving a professional and impartial analysis on the fairness and reasonableness of the offer that were proposed. The third issue is valuation of privatization offers. The basis for the amended prices formulation are not being discussed in detail. The sole reason stated clearly was to maximize the probability of listing success. When the IFA determines that the revised offer of $2.35 per share is fair and reasonable, the issue had arisen. Because some of the shareholders believe a price range from 2.45 to $2.55 would have been more reasonable. Statement of the problem. This case study analysis concerns on the effectiveness of the board of directors since a balanced board composition will not assure the directors to make independent judgment in making decisions and to act in the best interest of the shareholders. Next, we move to the discussion questions. The first discussion question is, what are the most important corporate governance issues that could have threatened the board's effectiveness? How might Capital Asia shareholders' interests be compromised given the composition of the board of directors and their links to Capitaland? The second discussion question is, should parent company independent directors who serve on subsidiary boards be considered independent directors on subsidiary boards? How do the corporate governance rules in our country deal with such situations in general and in the specific situation of a privatization? The third discussion question is, what responsibility does the target firm's board of directors, the independent financial advisor, and also the regulators play in a privatization? The discussion objectives. The first objective is to identify the corporate governance issues that have an influence on the board's effectiveness And also the way of CMA shareholders' interests can be compromised given the composition of the board of directors and their links to Capitaland. The second objective is to determine either the parent company's independent directors who sat on subsidiary boards can be deemed independent directors on the subsidiary boards, and to know how do the corporate governance rules in our country deal with such situations in general and in the specific situation of privatization. And the third objective is to identify the role of the target firm's board of directors, the independent financial advisor, and also the regulators in a privatization.
Hello, my name is Nurul Aliafaf and I'm going to continue on Chapter 2 Literature Review. We started by giving definitions of directors according to Section 2 of the Companies Act 2016, in which director includes any person occupying the positions of director of a corporation by whatever name called includes a person in accordance with whose directions or instruction the majority of directors of a corporation are accustomed to act. Moving on is regarding the board independence. Malaysian Courts of Corporate Governance 2021 Guidance 5.2 and 5.3 stipulate that board that comprises a majority of independent directors allows for more effective oversight of management. Not only whether a director's background and current activities qualify him or her as independent, but also whether the director can act independently of management. On the other hand, Corporate Governance Guide Pulau 114 explains that the idea of independence is based on situation, and to balance influence, independent directors are supposed to flaunt elements of objectivity both in appearance and in mind. Next is board composition. The eminence of the board in executing its oversight responsibility depends on its size, composition, and the qualities of the leaders. An effective board should include the right people, with an appropriate mix of skills, knowledge, experience, and independent elements for an effective decision-making process. Bursa Malaysia listing requirement para 15.02 has set out that a listed issuer must ensure that at least two directors or one-third of the board of directors of a listed issuer, whichever is higher, are independent directors. While MCCG 2021 Practice 5.2 on the other hand suggested to have at least half of the board comprises independent directors, and for large companies, the board comprises a majority of independent directors. Other than that, we also include the definitions of independent director by Bursa Malaysia Practice Note 13. It is stated that independent director refers to a director who is independent of management and free from any business or other relationship which could interfere with the exercise of independent judgment or the ability to act in the best interest of an applicant or a listed issuer. Independent directors are important to allow unbiased decisions and manners in an organization. The note further explains that the director must not belong to subsection A, B, C, D, E, F, and G of the listed company or its related corporation. Section 7 of the Companies Act 2016 stated that a corporation is deemed to be related to each other if it is the holding company or subsidiary of another corporation or is a subsidiary of the holding of another corporation.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Nurul Ainajah binti Muhammad Daud. So I will continue the presentation. Next is parent companies. Parent company is one that has a controlling or majority interest in another company, which also gives it a right to control operation of subsidiary companies. Parent companies can directly involve in the management of its subsidiaries, or another option is they can have a more hands-off approach. Hand-off approach means a situation or people in a way that allows others to make decisions. There are two most common ways where company can become parent companies, either through acquisition of smaller companies or through spin-off. Acquisition is where larger companies often buy smaller companies to minimize competition, broaden their operations, and reduce overhead. While spin-off is where a business has streamlined their operations, where it is less productive or an unrelated subsidiary business. For instance, a company might spin off one of its mature business units that are not growing, so it can focus on product or service with better growth performance. Facebook buying out Instagram is an excellent example of an acquisition that added a subsidiary to a parent company. Next is subsidiary company. A subsidiary company is a company that is controlled by another company, which is parent company, that has sub-business operations or purposely to own its subsidiaries. However, subsidiaries and parent company are separate legal entities where both companies have independent liabilities, governance, and tax. Besides, the parent company will naturally influence how the subsidiary company operate. As the major shareholder, the parent company can elect the board of directors and drive the overall business strategy. The ownership of a subsidiary can be quite complex, which the most common and straightforward way is through 50% or more ownership of voting shares in order to exercise control of that subsidiary. Then we move to privatization. According to Perry 1988, privatization is an idea involving transferring the production of goods and services from public sector to private sector. In other words, it is transfer of ownership, property or business from the government to private sector when government unwilling to become the owner of business or entity. In Malaysia, privatisation began in 1983 when former Prime Minister Dr. Mahathir Mohamad published his government's intention on privatisation policy. Privatisation is undertaken to reduce government involvement in business, which is done to avoid the crowding out of private sector investments and to reduce cost of government intervention in business. However, in 2019, the Star had reported that since many SOEs are public monopolies, privatisation has typically transformed them into private monopolies. In turn, abuse of such market monopoly power enables more rents and corporate profits. As corporate profits are the private sector's yardstick of success, privatized monopolies are likely to abuse their market power to maximize rents for themselves. Thus, privatization tends to burden the policy.
Hi, my name is Shukrina Batrisha bint Azman. For the third and final part of literature review, we discuss about the roles of board of directors, the independent financial advisor, and the regulators. Pursuant to Section 213, Subsection 1, the Companies Act 2016 requires a director to exercise their powers in good faith in the best interest of the company. A director has to fulfill 3 categories of duties, and they are fiduciary duties, duties of care, skill, and diligence, and statutory duties. As a fiduciary agent, a director has to act bona fide in the interest of the company and must not commence their powers for any collateral purposes or personal interest. According to Ananda Raja, 2004, a director whose interests conflicting with his fiduciary duties is required to disclose the potential conflict to the company for approval if he chooses to maintain the interest. Tricker, 2013, explains that a conflict of interest would surface if the director could personally benefit from a situation involving the company or from a decision taken by the board. Moreover, any behavior inducing personal gains could lead the priorities of shareholders to be at stake. Aligned with MCCG 2021, Practice 1.1 denotes that the board should set the company's strategic aims, ensure that the necessary resources are in place for the company to meet its objectives, and review management performance. The board should set the company's values and standards and ensure that its obligations to its shareholders and other stakeholders are understood and met. Furthermore, Guidance G1.1 states that all directors should objectively discharge their duties and responsibilities at all times as fiduciaries in the interest of the company. All directors must act with integrity, lead by example, keep abreast of his responsibilities as a director and of the conduct, business activities, and development of the company. Meanwhile, there are several roles of the independent financial advisors. In Malaysia, the Financial Services Act 2013 regulates companies and individuals that provide monetary advice to companies and individual clients. In detail, the Act aims to provide for the regulation and supervision of financial institutions, payment systems, and other relevant entities, and the oversight of the money market and foreign exchange market to promote financial stability and for related consequential or incidental matters. Any financial institution that carries out financial advisory business must be approved by Bank Negara Malaysia beforehand. Financial advisors generally assist their clients in understanding financial plans and construct them and recommend the best possible investment. However, the directors of a company, financial advisors must be wary of any possible conflict of interest. Lastly, a regulator is a governmental agency created by the legislative body to enforce specific laws. Some of the key roles of regulators are monitoring compliance with contractual obligations to the government and users and other legal and regulatory requirements, establishing technical, safety and quality standards and monitoring their compliance, imposing penalties for non-compliance, facilitating dispute resolution between parties. Subjected to the Securities Commission Act 1993, the Securities Commission Malaysia is a regulatory body that reports to the Minister of Finance, is responsible in rulemaking, enforcing regulations pertaining to the capital market, ensuring sustainable market growth and development, supervising capital market activities and market institutions, including the exchanges, clearing houses and registered market operators, and regulating all entities and persons licensed under the Capital Markets and Services Act 2007. The Commission regulates and ensures market growth are always done with the objective of protecting the investors, including initiatives to raise their levels of financial and investment literacy.
Discussion Question 1. Examine CMA's Board of Directors. What are the key corporate governance issues that could have compromised the board's effectiveness? How might CMA shareholders' interests be compromised given the compositions of the Board of Directors and their links to Capitaland? By examining the CMA's Board of Directors, it was crystal clear that the board is adhering with Bursa Malaysia listing requirement for its composition, in which there are more than one-third of the boards that are independent directors. The board also adheres with MCCG 2021 Practice 5.2, which requires the board to comprise a majority of independent directors. However, this issue arises. The first issue is the inability of the independent directors to act independently in making decisions. This refers to the incompetence of the directors to make unbiased conclusions, as they might hold some deceptions towards the company or the shareholders. According to Razai, not only the director's background and current activities that would qualify him as independent, but also whether the director can act independently of management. Referring to the case study, it was the directors of Capitaland who offered the shares of Capitamalls Asia to be bought at such price. However, Tan Sri Amir Syam and Arfad Panir are the independent directors of both the parent company and its subsidiary at the same time. Therefore, there was a high possibility of unfairness and price manipulation among directors. Also, both of them might be affected by influences that enable them to make independent judgment. This has led to the dissatisfaction of a number of shareholders, the minority shareholders. When the directors are unable to act independently or flaunt elements of objectivity to make independent judgment in their thoughts and decisions as suggested in MCCG 2021 and Razai, it will lead to the ineffectiveness of the board. The second issue is the conflict of interest of the directors. MCCG 2021 recommends for companies to establish a code of conduct and ethics that stipulate measures to deal with conflict of interest. In addition, Companies Act 2016 also embodies common law principles on the duty to avoid conflict, requires the directors to exercise their powers for the purpose of which they are conferred and not to advance any personal interest by reason of their position as directors. In addition, according to the Board Code of Conduct of Ethics of Capitaland, directors must not allow himself to get into a situation where there is a conflict of interest. By analysing the case study above, we could say that the inability of the independent directors to act independently has led to the conflict of interest between the directors and the shareholders. This can be seen when the boards of Capitaland seem to represent their own interests by offering an undervalued share price without being considered to protect the interests of the same as minority shareholders. Conflict of interest could have compromised the board's effectiveness as Tan Sri Amisham and Arfad Panir might have known some internal information or have their own interests in both companies. CMA shareholders' interests might be compromised given the compositions of the board of directors and their links to Capitaland by introducing the contractual protections for minority shareholders under the shareholders' agreement. According to Chen, shareholders' agreement is a legal arrangement among shareholders that stipulates on how the company should be managed and outlines the shareholders' rights, obligations, and their protection. Even though this agreement is not mandatory, it aims to ensure that all shareholders in the company are treated fairly and none of them are left behind. Although the Companies Act 2016 has provided some form of protections for minority shareholders, shareholder agreement will increase their possibility to be heard in the court if there is any oppression towards their rights in the company. The most important clause that needs to be included in the agreement in order to compromise the interests of the minority shareholder is the reserve matters. Reserve matters are the matters where the company will need unanimous voting to decide. This will eventually safeguard the rights of the minority shareholders against the majority who are most likely to outvote others in meetings. By having this agreement, the CMA shareholders' interests can be compromised. Hence, improper valuation of shares would not happen anymore in the future.
Discussion question number 2. Should independent directors of parent companies who serve on boards of subsidiary be considered independent directors on the subsidiary boards? How do the corporate governance rules in your country deal with such situations in general and in the specific situation of a privatization? The answer is yes. Independent directors of parent companies can be considered as independent directors on the subsidiary boards. According to Bursa Malaysia, independent director is a director who is independent of management and free from any business or other relationship which could interfere with the exercise of independent judgment or ability to act in the best interest. As such, independent director must fulfill the requirements or conditions to present the role so that there will be no problems in corporate governance. Independent directors can make decisions equally for both parent and subsidiary companies because it does not have any business relation with these companies. How did corporate governance deal with this situation in our country? There are two methods which are Bursa Malaysia Listing Requirements (BMLR) and Malaysian Code on Corporate Governance (MCCG). Under Chapter 15 of BMLR, all companies should have their nominating committee and audit committee. Nominating committee are members who typically work to evaluate the characteristics and performance of board members and are responsible for selecting the best candidates for each seat on the board. While audit committee are people provide oversight of the financial reporting process, the audit process, the company's system of internal controls, and compliance with law and regulation. For MCCG, it constructs board leadership and effectiveness under Principle A. This covers board responsibilities, board composition and remuneration along with their practices and guidance.
Lastly, we discussed the third and final question pertaining to the case study. What is the role of the board of directors of the target firm, the independent financial advisor, and regulators in a privatization? First and foremost, we have to acknowledge the importance of relationship between the board of directors and shareholders. The board of directors should be able to make collective decisions to the best interest of the shareholders without the intervention of personal interest. This is aligned with Practice 1.1 and Guidance G1.1 provided by MCCG 2021 that the board is subjected to shareholders and hold responsibilities as fiduciaries in the interest of the company. However, the decision of the board of Capitaland in offering the initial low premium offer price of 2 Singaporean dollars and 22 cents per share to the minority shareholders appeared to be questionable and induced assumptions by many. Because of the uproar from the shareholders concerning the low offer price, it led Capitaland to raise the offer to a final price of 2 Singaporean dollars and 35 cents per share. Consequently, the shareholders who had previously agreed to sell at the initial price would have their price revised to the final price. This situation was worsened when Capitamalls Asia (CMA) had crossed the 90% threshold, meaning it could be delisted from the Singapore Exchange and the Stock Exchange of Hong Kong. The issues surrounding the offered share price and the delisting suggested that the board has failed to protect the interests of the shareholders that is pivotal in any companies. The board of directors should have encouraged more transparency from the independent directors who proposed the offer before such haste decision was implemented. In the event with Deutsche Bank, the appointed independent financial advisor found that factors in favor of the offer price outweigh in number the factors against, conveying both of the initial and revised offers to be fair and reasonable. However, the opinion of Deutsche Bank on the offer questioned the judgment of the advisor because the opinion was obviously not in the favor of minority shareholders. Not only that, the revised offer price was still deemed to be inferior. In this case, the appointed financial advisor would have access to more comprehensive information to better evaluate the offer that could help in arriving at a more detailed consensus. While Securities Investors Association (SIAS) does not comment on valuations and relies on the independent financial advice, SIAS has looked at various analyst reports to provide some perspective. And so, a regulatory body like SIAS must take serious view about board independence and the role of independent directors in representing the views of minority shareholders.
Next, we move to recommendation. The first recommendation is evaluate the board effectiveness and performance. The board evaluation must be conducted in order to determine the board effectiveness, its committee, and individual director, which can be referred to Practice 6.1 of the MCCG 2021. The fulfillment of oversight functions, transparency and accountability, and also the oversight of conflicts of interest are some of the generally recognized standards for the complete board review. This can be accomplished through board evaluation, which is an important and efficient feedback tool for boosting effectiveness and highlighting opportunities for further development. In every year, the board effectiveness can be evaluated through the nominating committee. The nominating committee is in charge of examining and nominating new directors to the board of directors, as well as facilitating the shareholders' election of new directors. So the typical role of the CEO in picking new directors who may or may not be independent from management can be reduced by an effective nomination committee. According to MCCG 2021 Practice 5.2, independent directors must comprise at least half of the board, while larger companies having a majority of independent directors. A majority of independent directors on the board allows for more effective managerial monitoring. Multiple directorship or conflict of interest that could prevent the independent directors to act independently, which happened in the case study, can be avoided if the nomination committee plays their part in nominating qualified directors for the position.
The second recommendation is protect minority shareholders' right. Corporate governance framework should ensure the equitable treatment of all shareholders, including minority shareholders. All shareholders should have the opportunity to obtain the effective redress of violation of their rights. According to CEO of Minority Shareholders Watchdog Group, MSWG, there are three shareholders' basic rights, which are right to seek information, right to voice opinion, and right to seek redress. Although minority shareholders hold less than 50% shares in a company, they need to be treated fairly. So, one of the ways to protect them is by introducing shareholders' agreement. This agreement will limit the ability of majority shareholders to overrule minority shareholders when making decisions such as issues on new shares, appointment and removal of directors, and taking new debt. Based on the case study, CMA formed an independent board committee to advise minority shareholders on financial. The directors have no direct relation to anyone in Capitaland that would have rendered them incapable of providing independent opinions to the offer. This effort shows how reasonable Capitaland protects its minority shareholder rights so that they will satisfy and trust the independent board.
The last recommendation is to make disclosure at directors' meetings. It is the responsibility of the directors to disclose their interests if there is a potential for a conflict to arise. Once the directors disclose their interests, it will come to the consent of the board to determine the actions that need to be taken further. The board can also seek recommendations from outside parties to assist them in making decisions. However, the interested directors would not be allowed to participate or vote during the meeting. On the other side, the board can also propose a measure where, when it is believed that a director has not disclosed a conflict of interest, the officer, shareholders, or the directors could notify others, and the chairman during meeting could offer him an opportunity to be heard. Based on the case study, it will be such a good step for Tan Sri Amesha and Arfad Panel to disclose their interest as an independent director in both parent company and its subsidiary. The disclosure is made in order to avoid any upcoming conflict of interest when decisions need to be made by the directors of Capitaland as well as Capitamalls Asia. Also, the other directors in Capitamalls can notify the board so that the chairman could offer him an opportunity to be heard and take further actions regarding the matter.
In conclusion, the concerns surrounding the delisting and privatization of CAMA gives out the issue of honesty, particularly from the independent directors. The board of directors should have acted in favor of the company, not self-interest. Therefore, acting in honest and transparent manner, as well as good practice of corporate governance, will result in higher accountability and ensure that the interests of shareholders are safeguarded. On the basis of independence of a director, the role of an independent director is to improve credibility and corporate governance standard by involving in various committees across the company. Besides being able to give far-reaching objectives in deliberation in the company, independent directors must balance the conflicting interests of the stakeholders. Even though a director may be independent by definition, it does not suggest that he can act in absolute independence. The series of events surrounding Capitaland'S and CMA brings about the importance of corporate governance practices to promise fair treatment for the shareholders and other stakeholders. An extensive measure to maintain the fairness should be implemented to prevent the occurrence of oppression towards shareholders. With that, a proper remedy and protection is to be provided to curb the conducts that infringe upon the rights of minority shareholders. That is all from us. Thank you.